We've tried to be very conscious of the heritage of the building and bring the building back to something of splendour, because it was, at the time it was built, something really striking for the town. We've tried very hard here to create a building that has a history but also a future, and I think that's one of the things we're really proud of.
The initial part of the project was a great deal of stripping out and removing all the old market stalls and a century's worth of bits and pieces and accumulated debris, shall we say. And the early part of that as well was removing the centre wall which had divided the market hall for about 70 years, and that's made a huge difference.
When the building was first built, it was originally one big market hall, just one big space. At some point, people built more structures inside. There was some major works of the shop front done in the 20s, and then the kind of last big intervention was a wall that was built up the central spine of the hall, which split the place into two, and that was one of the problems with the place when we started. Really, it didn't feel like one volume in one space where people could interact and trade, so that was one big decision, to take away that wall early on, and that's kind of proved quite successful.
Before we could do anything, we actually had to raise the funding to pay an architect to come and have a look at the building, and we managed to do that by getting some funding from the Architectural Heritage Fund, which Welsh Government matched, and that paid for a condition survey, by which we had architects come in and do a full appraisal of the building and then prepare an options appraisal report where it just looked at what were the opportunities for reusing the building and making the most of what the building had to offer while fulfilling our objectives for the building. Interestingly enough, everyone will remember the cattle shed clad front.
It kind of become quite run down. Mainly because of the way it had been looked after as a building and the kind of changes that were made over time.
And we thought that all of the original elevation had disappeared, but once that was actually stripped back, there were still even parts of that front elevation remaining. So there is a lot still there from the original. It's just that as it's all been stripped back and repaired, that the beauty of the building's been able to shine through. The rear elevation, that is as it was, apart from a few minor repairs to brickwork. It's just been cleaned up and made to look a little bit loved again.
What stayed the same was one of the better things about the place is the sense of space and light that we get from the roof and the roof lights. And the Market Street elevation is pretty much as original. We've done some brickwork repairs and repointing, but that was in pretty good condition.
The greatest obstacle to the whole project was the pulling together of the funding package, because we've had to go to 3 funders, we've had to go through complex 2-stage funding processes for each funder. That is a fundamental part of significant hard work in making a project happen, and of course that's the part that nobody can see.
The original design, when we started the project, was where there was a mezzanine level on both sides of the market hall. We decided to omit the mezzanine level at that stage, which left us with a kind of flat area of roof, potentially. So we started to look at different ideas to see what we could do with that element.
Well, the original part of the project was that before we were on site, the stalls would be 2-storey with a gallery around the building, but for costs and various other issues we decided just to have 1 story of stalls, so hence the flat roofs were dropped and gave us the ability to have this more informal roof structure, if you like. So it's an opportunity to do something a little bit more creative. The old stalls were pretty derelict, so it was necessary to rebuild them, and in fact the structure of the new stalls is remarkably similar to the old ones, but there's a slightly modern interpretation. We didn't want them to look too formal or too structured or too much like a row of garages, so now we have this modern interpretation which we think looks a lot better than some other market halls.
bits of it that we haven't been able to save, such as some of the old tables that were in there, which were beautiful tables but had gone to a point of disrepair. We've seen how we can reuse them in the building, so the new counter on the cafe is actually a reuse of old materials that were in the day tables, so that, you know, bits of the building have gone back in a different format if we haven't been able to save it as it was. The most costly part of the project has been doing the essential repairs. In terms of the total budget, we're looking at a capital project cost of 1.2 million. Just to do the repairs that were needed to create a 30-year life in the building, which is standard industry practice for refurbishment, that was over 800,000. So I think that's important to say, because it puts into context the expense of the project, and people think it was really, really expensive, but the building had degenerated so much that just to save the building was the biggest element of the cost. The more modern bits, the add-ons, aren't as expensive in the context of the wider builds as people think. Probably the single most expensive element has been the roof, but in terms of cost per square metre rebuild, the front elevation would have been the most costly item, purely because we've had to rebuild it with purpose-made bricks. Each brick has a special angle, particularly in the arches, as each brick going up the arch is slightly different, so they've all had to be recalculated, they've had to be calibrated, they'd have to be built. It fits together like a really complex jigsaw, and it's a really interesting project, but in today's age of mass production and machinery cutting, it has had an expensive impact on the project, but hopefully to the better.
Biggest challenge on the job, I think, is to replicate a lot of the old handmade bricks, which has taken quite a long time. And there's a lot of different varieties of bricks. We've probably got nearly 100 different sizes and shapes on site, so there's quite a lot of bricks in that, and a lot of work to do that. That's in conjunction with rebuilding the High Street facade.
We didn't really know how many of the original bricks we could resalvage. And we had no records really of the original arches, how they were built, so we had to try and decipher from photographs and records of a good as approximation as we could of what was there originally, and then the sourcing and procuring of similar products was one of the most challenging things, really. It's fantastic how you can track the sunlight through the day, and the quality of the light changes from kind of dawn to dusk. It's one of the best features of the place. Here I think there's been quite a good balance of trying to find out as much as we could about the original building, and trying to put new things in as well, which will hopefully enhance the overall building.
As we started breaking up the building, we came across a fireplace in the corner, which wasn't on any of the plans. There's certainly no chimney behind it. It wasn't in the original building at all, because there was no first floor in, so at some point someone decided to put a fire in this room, probably for very good reasons, because it would have been very cold when these were first separated off from the market hall and made into shops. Another really interesting feature of the building now is that with the new balcony level, we can actually be up here and touch the main roof beam and the top of the supporting columns, the original Victorian columns, and it really gives you a feel for the mass and size of the buildings and the columns, which from the ground you can just see them in a distance. So I think that's a really interesting feature of the new build.
What's been good is the working together as a team with the client and the contractor. They've been great, and because the design has evolved through the process as well. You know, it's slightly different now to what it was when we started, but that's come across after seeing the space and realising the full potential really of all the areas.
Yeah, it's a key building, it's a splendid building right in the heart of the town centre conservation area. I hope that it will make people be proud to live in Newtown.